We're going to talk about the law of listening, which is the second of the 10 laws of high performance collaboration. So the law of listening, the test for listening is learning. Listening. Listening is something that many people think they do well, or that we do it all day long. But when we say the test for listening is learning, what do we mean, and why is that such an important test?
Because we work with so many different people in so many different organizations, and having a way to elevate the power of their listening is really important. Because most people listen reactively. I just get what I get. And whatever I heard must be what you said. And whatever I felt like you meant must be what you meant. So there's not much conscious listening. And we say if you have to listen to another human being sufficient to come to know something you didn't already know, you had to leave your own private reactive space. You had to actually occupy the world of the other. So we say if you make that your test, it guarantees that you're not trapped in your own opinion, your own isolated point of view. It actually has listening be a source of connection. So originally, many years ago, I thought I was going to be a practicing attorney. And there, what we're taught to do is listen for anything that validates your point of view. That's a much lower test than I learned something from the other. So we just wanted something that would have people naturally, if they took that as what I'm out for, I need to come away from this conversation with something I didn't already have, something I didn't already know. You will elevate the power of your listening.
You said conscious listening. What's the difference between conscious listening and active listening, as you hear a lot these days?
The first time I ever heard about active listening was actually from parent effectiveness training.
Ah.
I don't know, 40 years ago.
We're going to set that one aside and not actually evaluate how good that was. So just as
that's a different TV
that's
series.
A different series. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I didn't say I took it. I just read the book. PET, Parent Effectiveness Training. And in some ways, it's harmonic with what I remember them talking about. But I mean the difference between accidental listening and intentional listening. So accidental is I just get what I get. And people are not often conscious that they have the power to actually alter their own way of listening. For instance, if I go into this meeting and I am going to get myself completely oriented about, I'm going to find out what's wrong, failing, a shortcoming, a disappointment. So I'm going to listen in this whole meeting for being disappointed. And if you actually give yourself that as a listening focus,
you'll find it.
You'll find it. You'll get it. So for us, listening as an intentional act means you're listening for something. You're consciously, awaredly listening for something. And we say if you're listening for learning, what happens is the people you're with experience contributing to you. And especially if you've got position power, that's a huge moment. Because if people who have less position power feel like they've contributed to someone who has more, their sense of safety goes up, their sense of security goes up, their willingness to be open increases. So I am impassioned about this as a test for learning, a test for listening. I think listening and learning are so closely allied. And I like being able to catch myself merely affirming what I already think when I'm talking to people, because that's when I have to stop, take a breath, shake it off, and say, what do you have to give that I've yet to receive?
And Emma Rose, I think your question going back to active listening, particularly in the context of high performance collaboration, too often, and maybe this is like my own personal pet peeve, people that are practicing active listening just say my words back to me to prove that they actually heard the words I said. Mm-hmm. That's not the same as actually getting what I meant by the words I said.
Or being listening with an intent to learn what you meant by the words
That's right.
you said. So even checking my understanding. So I think what I'm getting out of what you're saying is this. Is that right?
That's right.
But what I'm getting out of it, rather than, I'm going to just parrot back to you exactly what you said and pretend that that's understanding.
Exactly. And when we're talking about high performance collaboration, if we go back to the first law about having a shared future, a common future, I think one of the challenges when we talk about listening to learn is that when we have that shared future, we might skip past important differences because we have a shared future. And so we're using the language of that shared future and we're missing some of the nuances of things that you're saying that are slightly different than the things that I'm saying. I often say, if I walk into a room and ask people, what do you mean by the word strategy? We will get a dozen different definitions easily. And yet people will start the conversation with, we're here to talk about strategy, and just go without pausing to say, like, wait, what are we actually here to talk about today? What does strategy mean to each of us? And sometimes it feels like, well, people worry about navel gazing or getting too into the weeds. But really, I want to really understand and learn from you how you see the world, or how you see the challenge or the opportunity or the common future of the thing that we're in together. And so when we're talking about the test for listening is learning, that actually requires that I set aside even things that we've talked about in the past to see, is there something new for you in it today? And I don't think very many of us actually elevate the degree that we're listening to that level. We think, if I can say your words, then I listen to you.
A tape recorder would do that. Yeah, that's not powerful listening, that you can merely utter back an utterance.
Well, and I think that people take for granted the power of their listening and how much just the quality of your listening has influence over the people around you or what you're trying to accomplish. And you mentioned position power. So particularly those with some sort of authority over others, the way in which they listen actually has an impact on a whole lot more than just what was said. So I'm wondering if we can spend a little bit of time there. So when it comes to power, what do you think people with position power need to be mindful of when they're in those kinds of situations?
Well, one of my favorite experiences in the history of our practice associated with that was when Greg Merton was the executive in charge of the inkjet manufacturing business in Hewlett-Packard. And they were introducing another generation of thermal inkjet. I forget what it was, TIDS 3.0 or 4.0. But every time they got to a new generation, they had to declare a prototype line. So which one of the sites in the world would get that prototype line? And it was a big deal because that meant they had the first lines, the first production. Often because they'd proven it there, they would add more lines there for that. So it was a boon to that site and their employees, and people really loved getting the next prototype line. So we were at a meeting in Singapore where Greg had people from the sites all over the world because he wanted to decide where the prototype line for this next generation of thermal inkjet was going to go. And in the room were people from Singapore, Corvallis, San Diego, Puerto Rico, Ireland, somebody from headquarters in Palo Alto. So there was a total of 9 people there besides Greg and me. And as Greg was having everybody say what they wanted to say to get started, Fu, who was the head of the Singapore operation and hugely admired, it was the most successful in terms of results, manufacturing results in the whole company at that time. Fu said, Greg, we were talking last night at the bar. We just want to say something that I'm going to say, but it's not just me. He said, just tell us where the next manufacturing line is going to go. Because then we can use this 2 days together to do planning and lots of other things. We all trust you. Just tell us. And Greg said, Fu, I cannot possibly do that. And Fu said, why not? He said, because 9/10 of my brain is out here and I don't know what I think yet. Mm. That was somebody with enormous position power, created an environment for learning from those people and actually, in a way, calling them to account for educating him.
Mm-hmm.
So it was beautiful. And we did take most of those 2 days to actually learn from each of those people and what the different issues were. And he ended up deciding it was going to Puerto Rico. And when that was declared, he had the whole room fully behind it. You know, it was not like, oh gosh, Cheeky and that team in Puerto Rico got the line. It was a beautiful demonstration of somebody with power listening to learn as a way to have people come together to be responsible for something.
Yeah, because if the person who has position power listens defensively, it automatically shuts down other people being willing to contribute into the conversation,
Yeah.
which means it's really hard for the whole room to get smarter together.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Emma Rose, you asked about position power. I think when we talk about high-performance teams and listening to learn, I think information power is another really important one to point to, because so often we have people on those teams that come with a very specific subject matter expertise.
Mm-hmm.
And they come and just want everyone to listen to them. And then they get frustrated when people don't get what they're trying to contribute. And often it's actually because they're trying to do it as communication as a one-way, right, as a broadcast, as opposed to actually having people engage with them about the particular expertise they have or the data or the information, and getting curious about why people are not understanding something, as opposed to frustrated by why people are not understanding something. Years ago, I worked for a financial services company, and we used to do a lot of data analysis, and I was an analyst at the time. You have probably heard me tell this story. And another analyst and I got into a raging argument because we kept having different results out of the data. And it probably took us the better part of a week of arguing about the insight that I had from the data versus the insight that he had from the data. Finally, I said to him, out of curiosity, when did you pull your data set? He said, on Monday. I had pulled mine on Friday. This happened to be an organization where a lot of response data came in over the weekend. So the difference of those 2 days actually was significant to the results, but we were just arguing our points of view about the data and not actually stopping to listen to each other because we were so convicted we were right.
Well, and I think that is a trap for people with subject matter expertise, or even folks that are individual contributors that do have a lot of information about a particular topic. You can be unconscious of the ways in which you're just listening for that people won't understand where you're coming from. Like, oh, well, you don't get it. And you haven't seen what I see. And it might be a natural thing to fall into.
They fall into the trap of, let me just explain to you. Let me just keep explaining, as opposed to getting curious about how come this thing I'm saying isn't landing.
Right.
I think one of the ways to really hone listening to learn is to notice when I'm listening for something else.
Right.
So this listening for is a big deal for us, as you know, because we say listening's like radar, and you get whatever you're organized to find.
Mm-hmm.
So some radar are just for airborne objects of a certain density, and they wouldn't notice wind. Other radar is out there to find wind. So whatever your radar is designed to find, it's really good at finding. So a great practice is to start noticing, what am I listening for other than listening to learn? Often people are listening for validation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just listening for evidence that what I already think, what I already have, what I already know is correct. That's weak in terms of expanding the intelligence of the group. And it's betting, if I'm doing that, I'm betting on my intelligence is sufficient to what all of us are up to. That ain't good for the team. Because everybody has a perspective. They see the system from a different point of view. They have different kind of information. So I like the idea of practice discovering what you're listening for when you're not learning.
Yeah.
And you almost always find there's some orientation, some listening bias, and you're gathering information consistent with that. Then you shift. You know, years ago, I did something that for me was a really shocking moment, which was I was talking to a person who was saying that they were really trying to organize not being in a rage. They were so angry because this voicemail they had, clearly this person was out to attack them and undermine them. And I asked him, we were sitting in his office, and I asked him, I said, would you be willing to play the message for me? And he said, well, it's kind of personal. I said, that's up to you and me. If you trust me and know that I respect you and everything will remain confidential. And he said, okay. So he played me the message. And then I said, okay, I'd like you to listen to the message in front of me and point out all the evidence in there that this person is trying to undermine you. He said, that won't be hard. I said, okay, let's go. So we listened to it again, and then I said, okay, what's all the evidence they're out to undermine you? And he listed all this stuff. Blah, blah, blah. She said that. I said, okay, good. All right, well, now we're going to listen to it again. And he said, why? You just heard it. And I said, I'm going to ask you to listen for something else. What is this person trying to contribute? Whether you think she's doing it well or not, what do you think she's trying to contribute? And I asked him to stop and take a breath. I said, see if you can physically get yourself to kind of move, like I'm moving from proving she's an underminer to I'm going to discover what she's trying to contribute. So I said, take a minute, see if you can make that shift. And he did. He listened to it again, and it was incredible. What he reported back, he said, I am so embarrassed. I said, I wouldn't be embarrassed by being ridiculously normal. That we tend to believe our reactions is an accurate picture of what came at us. That's reactive listening. That's not intentional listening. And I don't know if I should say this as a recording. What's that thing you say about people often come to you with?
Yeah, I was going to say, people are always telling you what are their purposes, concerns, and circumstances. It's just that it's often wrapped in barbed wire, bullshit, or heartbreak.
Yeah. So her attempt to contribute could have been wrapped in barbed wire, bullshit, and heartbreak.
That's right.
But it was still there.
That's right.
It's just that he heard the first thing and wasn't listening through that for what's the purpose in the background, what's the hope in the background. When you can listen through people's disturbance for what it is they care for that has them to be disturbed about this, that's learning in a very deep way. That's learning that's not just repeating somebody's words. It's actually them feeling known, feeling received. And often all it takes is asking the question.
Mm-hmm. I think this is a really important point because I think we say listen to learn frequently. And I think people often take that listen to learn about the content of the conversation. That's not wrong. So that's absolutely one of the objectives is what's the content. But this thing about that people are handing you their purposes, concerns, and circumstances, that's the other layer of it, is that there's something that had that person want to raise the issue in that moment. Mm-hmm. Right. And so what's the spirit of what they're trying to say? Years ago, I took a complaint call. We were doing a program out on the West Coast, and one of our project managers sent an email about it. Somebody who was not going to be a part of this program called the office, and the project manager said, we're going to let you, Robin, talk to you about that because we don't know what the challenge is. And this guy just unleashed on me for about 5 minutes, just yelling about, I can't believe that this company is going to spend all this money for you to come and do this. These people don't listen. I've been here for 10 years. It's just, this is a waste of time. It's a waste of time and energy, but on and on and on. And so I took a breath and I had to, because he went on for a few minutes, so it gave me a moment to pause. And all I could think is, I'm on the East Coast, because the time I was, he's calling from the West Coast. Like, why would he call? He doesn't know me. What in the world would have him call to yell at me for a full 5 minutes? And I just said to him, it sounds to me like you and your team members, colleagues, have a lot that you'd love to offer that would make the experience of your customers better. And you're so frustrated that your managers aren't listening. He went, wow. And so we continued the conversation, but about an hour later, I got an email from him and he said, I have more hope in the organization than I've ever had before. And all I did was just give him back what he had in his heart, what he was trying to communicate. There was a lot of barbed wire in it. Mm-hmm. For me, it was easy to do in this particular moment because I knew it couldn't possibly be about me. Mm-hmm. But how could we do that in everyday moments, right? That realize that on our teams, most of the time, it's not actually about us. It's about something else that person just is either so deeply worried about or cares so much about, and they may not be doing it very eloquently or elegantly. Both those words are trying to come out at the same time. They might not be doing it in the kindest way possible, but they really do have something that they would just love to contribute and love for us to get.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's one of the higher forms of listening, to be able to listen through and past discontent. Because whenever something's coming at me as discontented, often I'll take it personally. I think it's an attack on me. I think it's rude. I think it's unprofessional, whatever all of my judgmental vocabulary might sum it up to eradicate the legitimacy of this person. To be able to stop and take a breath and listen through that. To go back to what you said about consciousness earlier,
Mm-hmm.
the other thing we found in all the work we've done with people on listening and speaking around the world is that most human beings think they're a good listener, but they got issues with other people who aren't.
Right. Yeah.
And that reminds me of years ago, we were asked to do a series of communication workshops that included some work on listening in a company. And the part of the company we're going into, we'd never worked in before. And the person who was the learning leader in that part of the company gave me what she wanted as her pre and post survey. And I looked at it. And one of the things on there was, in the pre-survey, she wanted people to say, on a scale of 1 to 5, how effective a listener are you? And then at the end of the experience, she said, on a scale of 1 to 5, how effective a listener are you? And I said, what do you hope to see? And she said, well, clearly I want people to say they're better listeners than when they came in. I said, if we do our job, the opposite will happen. The scores at the beginning will be way higher than at the end. And that's actually evidence of value. And you could see, she just looked shocked that I thought things being worse. Well, it's because to the normal way of thinking about listening, people validate their own power to listen. And if they ever question listening, it's somebody else's. So part of what we do is have people start to be conscious about their ability to move their listening in different places.
Yeah. Well, and what that has to do with then collaboration, it could be how to work through outright conflict or differences of opinion or competing priorities is something that we hear a lot. Or it could be proactive. So like we talked a lot about in the law of teamwork, the hunting for what's the thing we have in common or what's the thing we can help one another with or where do I find my place in this challenge that we're in. So that can be a more proactive way to be listening for what people care about, where you don't have to be in an outright conflict. But the same thing holds true through all of that. And that if you're learning being the test is what causes the high value at a faster pace with less money and less stress.
Well, it comes up even in brainstorming. So how often does people are going around, they're trying to generate new ideas and somebody's like, oh, we've done that before. Oh, that'll never work, right? It's because they're just going with what they already know to be true or what they already, without actually saying like, well, wait, say more about that idea. How would that work? Because half the time when people actually stop to do that, it's something radically different that the person actually has in their mind than what the other's interpreting it as.
It's something that leaders we respect all over the world are concerned about. Are they getting everything they're paying for in all the people that work inside of this organization? Mm-hmm. And in those moments, someone's got an idea and somebody goes, well, we already tried that, or I already know. That's suppressing something, which is why, and we'll talk about this later, we think that conversational timing is important. If you've asked people to generate ideas, it's not the time to destroy them. It's the time to just let them have a little time in the light and to be fleshed out. And what that brings me to is there's so much being said all over the place that it becomes a buzz phrase about psychological safety. And the concern about are people feeling free and safe and secure, sufficient to say what they really think. If people experience you learning from them, their sense of safety immediately goes up. And their openness goes up. Because people will tell you what they feel that it's safe to say.
Mm-hmm.
And so any moment that we make unsafe, well, I wish I wouldn't have said that. I don't care what people say, even if you wish they wouldn't have. If you learn something about what had them say it, that actually preserves and expands safety. Take on mastering listening to learn. Catching what we're listening for other than that. And if you really want to go to graduate school and listening to learn, listen for being contributed to. Listen for contribution, because that's the deep thing that they love that you learned.
Well, and I think listening and taking the time to listen well or care to work on the quality of your listening can feel like it takes more time, but going fast at the expense of listening well and understanding one another is going to slow you down in the long run. So that's a trap in itself. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to balance speed worship, as we've called it before, with value creation. That's the law of listening. Next up is the law of connection. The conversations are the work. So we'll see you then.